In this video, we're talking about exams or tests, predominantly what they mean or what they test, how they are used, and then why we use them, or why I don't want to use the word promote, but why we build a curriculum around those exams. In a future video, I'll be talking about more in depth in terms of what goes into the exams, but that's not the purpose of this video. So I think the simplest is to use a little bit of an analogy. For example, breakfast competition, where every person that's there gets 30 minutes to make a breakfast, and at the end they are given a specific rating or level. So if you're very good, you can make toast, sausages, different kinds of egg, then obviously your rating is going to be higher than somebody who can just make an omelette. That's an exam like IELTS or TOEFL. Everybody gets exactly the same thing to do, and at the end, the thing they do is assessed. Contrary to that, or I guess on the other side of that, you have exams like the Cambridge exams, which we use, or the Trinity exams, which is basically a leveled exam. So depending on the level you are, you get a different kind of task. So for example, if you're a complete beginner, let's go back to the breakfast idea, you might be asked to make toast and a boiled egg. And as you progress, as you get better at making breakfast, then perhaps at the next level, you'd be asked to make a poached egg and a scrambled egg. And the next level might be something like an omelette and something like egg in a hole, perhaps. And then as you progress more, eggs Benedict and things like that later. So each level has a different kind of task, still related to English, still related to learning English, but it's not all the same task. Our preference obviously is for something that's level specific, because it makes it a lot more possible for us to focus, and it builds like a stairway or stairs that the student can climb towards higher levels. So let's look at how they are used, and I'm going to tell you a story very briefly of my time when I was working as an IELTS examiner, something I don't do anymore because of a variety of reasons. I was examining a student who had a speech impediment, so she couldn't really speak. She needed to get 7 or 7.5 to go to Canada. She had a PhD in her field. She was very smart. Because of pronunciation, she couldn't get the score that she needed to go. I spoke to her after the exam, because I ran into her about a month later or 2 months later in a cafe. By that time, probably because of her, I decided that I don't want to examine IELTS anymore. And we spoke, and she didn't get into Canada at that point in time, which I think was a massive loss to Canada, predominantly because of a speech impediment. And I think it was the university in Canada's loss itself, because just speaking to her about her subject, I thought she was extremely knowledgeable and would have been a great asset. Now, we listen to the story and we think, well, you need a certain score to get into a university, to get into a country, and those are often misused. For example, if you want to work as a psychologist in an English-speaking country, you need a much stronger command of English to be able to notice nuances in what people say, as opposed to if you're working on maths projects where the bulk of what you do is calculations. There's no reason why both those people need exactly the same score. Now, while I do think there's a lot that could be done better, or there are problems with the exams like the IELTS exams and the Cambridge exams, this specific instance is a problem with how the exam is used. The government and the university is wrong. If you look at IELTS and specifically IELTS reports, it says that. So governments unfortunately are intellectually dishonest and lazy sometimes. And the reason I tell you this story is because so are we. So are the schools around us, so are teachers and parents when we look at exams. We are intellectually dishonest and lazy. We don't try to think about what the exam actually tells us and how we should use it. So as an example, there are private schools around us that if you get 15 shields for flyers, you can go into the private school, but if you get 14, you don't. That is a misuse of the exam. If you do KT or PET, some parents say you have to get an A pass, and if the student doesn't get an A pass, they have to retake the exam. If they've done flyers or movers and they haven't gotten 15 shields, they have to retake the exam. That's very similar to being in a breakfast competition. You can make scrambled eggs, but you get 14 out of 15 for the scrambled eggs. You want to move on to making omelettes and poached eggs, but your parents or the school says, no, your omelette isn't completely perfect. It tastes great. We can all eat it, but it's not 15 out of 15. And you can see how troubling that would be. And we're doing exactly the same thing when we look at exams in terms of you have to get 100% or you have to get 95% or above, because that's not what the exams are designed for. Once you can make scrambled eggs, you can move on to learning an omelette. And once you can do an omelette, you can move on to other things. You don't have to get everything absolutely perfect before moving on. In fact, if that is what you're trying to do, you will never actually move on. So often when somebody gets 95% plus on all the skills in the exam, it tells me three things. One, it might be a very, very good student, but more often than not, the student spent way too long at a specific level, perhaps 200 hours plus, or they shouldn't have done that exam. If you're getting 95% plus for every skill in KET, shouldn't you have perhaps tried PET? Shouldn't you have been in a PET class? Now that also doesn't mean if a candidate gets 95% plus for a KET exam that they should skip PET. I think a lot of that should depend on the assessment of a teacher that has more than a few minutes to actually speak to the student. The other thing is the learning hours. How long does it take to go up a level? If you're a young learner under the age of 12, normally about 180 hours to go from one level to the next. We do that in 120 hours, but there's three predominant reasons why. One, we have very, very good teachers, highly qualified, that know the exams back to front. Two, we are well resourced, and so are the students that come to our school. Generally, students have access to books, they have access to the internet. If you were living in an environment where you didn't have that, then obviously it would also take longer to do that. And three, they do have English classes outside. At school, even if a lot of people feel that the English classes at school are completely pointless, they're not. It is some exposure to English that also contributes to the learning hours. And the final point really is, when they do an exam like a Cambridge Starters Movers of Flyers exam, the exam's not for you, and the exam's not for me. The exam is for that student, for that child. If we go back to the breakfast example, if a kid can make an omelette and he gets a certificate, that certificate isn't for me, and that certificate is also not for his parents. It's to reward him for something that he's learned. And if 6 months or a year later he enters another breakfast competition and he makes eggs Benedict or eggs in a hole and he gets another certificate, again, that certificate is for that child. It's a reward for the hard work they've done. We should not attach the amount of value that we attach as teachers and parents to these certificates. We should attach value to the children and reward them by getting them to do these certificates if they want to.